All right, we're going to get started today. Welcome everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the TMA Detroit Case Study Webinar, Tales from the Front, Restructuring Case Studies. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we kick off, let me update you some of the TMA Detroit upcoming events. In August, we will have the Dream Cruise event, August 17th at the Brew House in Royal Oak. Also in August, the Network of Women Now Summer Garden Party on the 25th at the Grosse Pointe Yacht Club. And then in September, a rather busy month, we will have the Great Lakes Regional Event Conference, the 9th and 10th. That's in Warren, Ohio, east of Cleveland. And then the fall kickoff event, we will have some more details to follow on that shortly. And lastly, in September, we have the Mid-America Regional Conference, or the MARC, and that is the 20th and 21st of September in downtown Detroit at the Westin. We hope you can join us for those events. So today's program is Tales from the Front, Restructuring Case Studies. But before we get started, I want to thank all of our sponsors. First of all, our gold sponsors, then our silver sponsors, and our bronze sponsors. We could not have gotten here without your support. Thank you. And if you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please reach out to any TMA Detroit member. We'd love to have you join us. Today, we will dive in depth into two recent restructuring cases. These cases will have two flavors. One case involves a Subchapter 5 filing with a confirmed but liquidating plan, while the other was a straight turnaround case. The panel will present an overview of each case with a highlight on lessons learned during these two engagements. The panel members will also highlight their specific experiences, both things that worked well and ones that presented more of a challenge. Now let's get started. To set the stage for today's program, this panel will run about 45 minutes, and then we will take questions for the remaining 15 minutes. Please send your questions in as the program moves forward. Now, we will start with today's program. On the call, joining me today as panelists are Heather Gardner from the turnaround consulting firm of GWH Corp., Lynn Brimer from the corporate law firm of Strobl Sharp, and Michael Yarmo, my colleague from Newpoint Advisors Corporation, who is located in Toronto, Canada. And rather than introducing them myself, I will have each of them give a brief statement of their firms and backgrounds. So Heather?
Thanks, Paul. So my name is Heather Gardner. I'm with DWH. We're a business advisory firm that's focused on financial advisory, turnaround and restructuring, growth and transition, mergers and acquisition, and tribal economic development. Our typical clients have an annual revenue of $25 million to $150 million, and we focus on maximizing the value for all of our stakeholders while minimizing the risk. Paul?
Wonderful. Thank you. Lynn?
Good afternoon. My name is Lynn Brimer. I am with the firm of Strobl Sharp, PLLC. We are a corporate and business law firm focused on the mid-market business client. I specialize in Chapter 11 bankruptcy work with a focus on tax issues. I also have a tax practice as I'm a former IRS district counsel attorney. Just for the record, for anyone who saw before I muted my video, also with me this afternoon is my colleague, Pam Ritter, who worked the case together with me that Heather Gardner and I will be addressing. So her input is, I think, valuable to today's presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Michael Yarmo.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everybody. My name's Mike. As Paul mentioned, I'm actually in Toronto, Canada. However, our firm has continental scope, U.S. and Canada. So we'll do cases, obviously, all across the continent. We are a financial advisory firm, primarily focused on turnarounds and restructurings for cases 50 million in revenue or under, or senior debt 10 million and under. We're primarily working with insolvency attorneys and special asset groups. We'll do anything from turnaround lights, which are basically just cash flow models, all the way up to CRO work, Chief Restructuring Officer work, as well as Subchapter 5 trustee work, and also extreme accounting, depending on how heavy the hand that needs to be dealt with in terms of the actual case that we're dealing with.
Perfect. Thank you. And I have the privilege of serving as your moderator. I also work for the financial advisory and turnaround consulting firm of Newpoint Advisors. We've been in business now for 8.5 years. We've got 44 professionals in 20 offices. Michael gave you the overview on us. I would say one of the unique characteristics about our offering and the solutions we provide is that we often work on a fixed fee, fixed timeline basis and not an hourly approach in order to make ourselves affordable to the small business entrepreneur. So with that, let's go on to the program. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Heather Gardner. She will review a subchapter 5 case study that had a confirmed but liquidating plan. Heather, it's over to you.
Okay, everyone bear with me. I think I've got it, so it's set up. Okay, can everyone see that?
It's perfect.
Perfect. Okay, great. The one more. Okay. So we are talking about a case called Miller Tool and Die that we worked on. Miller Tool and Die, to give you a little bit of background, was a leading manufacturer of specialty machines and assembly lines for a variety of different industries, including automotive, energy, military, and medical devices. And they served across the world, both North, South, and Central America, Mexico, Europe, and Asia. This is kind of a timeline of everything that the organization went through. But bottom line, it was mid-October of 2020 that DWH was brought in, and we were brought in to provide strategic and financial support to develop and implement a financial restructuring plan. That plan included modeling and analysis of all their different options, validating the stalking horse proposal, and making recommendations and assisting with bank conversations. They had Miller Tool and Die also had a sister company called Miller Technical Systems, which was an FDA registered medical device manufacturer. Did a variety of different medical devices, but bottom line, Miller Technical Systems had the ability for continued growth and expansion. So the parties that were involved in this engagement was Comerica Bank. We worked with a special asset group out of Comerica. Lender counsel was Miller Canfield, with Steve Roach taking the lead and Mark Swanson handling the bankruptcy component. Borrower's counsel at Strobl and Sharp was Lynn Brimer, and Pam Ritter helped support. The DWH team was myself with lead. We had Ben Borish. It was a very complicated debt structure. And so we had support with affiliate company negotiations, and we had a variety of different team members help support the cash flow and liquidation analysis they had to get done. We were under a very tight time frame, and so it was all hands on deck. During the bankruptcy court process, we worked with Honorable Judge Tucker, and then Leslie Berg was the U.S. trustee, and Mark Schapira was the subchapter 5 trustee. So at the time of the engagement, we came in, as I mentioned, it was a very complicated debt structure. There were 2 separate legal entities that had different ownership. They were common through family, but they are different structures. We had one family member owned all of Miller Tool, and then there's a variety of family members that own Miller Technical. The creditor, as I mentioned, was Comerica. So MTD and MTS were joint and several co-borrowers on one revolver line and term debt. We call that our joint debt. They each had their own individual PPP loans, which they were in the process of wrapping up and applying for their forgiveness. In addition to that, a company called MMTI, which was owned, another related party, owned the building MTD was in, and they were a guarantor to the joint debt. Another company called Millstone Properties, another related party, had a mortgage with Comerica, and MTS was its occupant there. And so MTD and MTS ultimately guaranteed the Millstone Properties debt. In addition to that, there was a union contract that covered a majority of the employees at Miller Tool and Die, not at Miller Technical, just at Miller Tool and Die. And then in the midst of all of this, in addition to the Comerica being a creditor, there was an unrelated third-party creditor that also had lent money to MMTI and had, as a result, had a third-party lien on all of MMTI's assets, which include the building it owned, and as well as some other additional assets that it owned that was also being leased to another unrelated entity that we're not going to talk about. But again, very complicated, and we had to get in, understand it, and see where we're at. What we did was we came in for Miller Tool and Die, and we evaluated 2 scenarios. We looked at what the liquidating balance sheet scenario was going to be, and we looked at what a sale scenario was going to be. 2 different timeframes. There was a stalking horse that was interested in the business, and which is thus the 2 different timeframes we looked at. We also had to model out the 13-week cash flow the liquidation sale budget, and the pro forma of the balance sheet, what that was going to look like. At the same time, we were also looking at MTS because it was a separate entity. We needed to look at if we liquidated MTS at the same time as MTD, or what would that company look like if we had a go forward plan for 2021. And so we had to create a kind of complete pro forma income statement for 2021 because one did not exist. And we also had to create a really robust 13-week cash flow to best understand whether the entity could stand on its own, since the two had been tied together for so long. So we came in October of 19. We had our initial meeting with the bank on November 12th. Which we'll talk about, we restructured the entire deal December 18th, and MTD filed Chapter 5 on December 21st. Ultimately, the plan was complete and executed by mid-March, but ultimately was confirmed by the court at the end of April. So what we had to do not only was before the bankruptcy filing, so we had to completely restructure the entire debt prior to going into the bankruptcy. And we did this in the form of a prepackaged DIP financing for Miller Tool and Die and a 1-year forbearance agreement with Miller Technical Systems. So with Miller Tool, what we did is we separated the lines of credit. Comerica provided DIP financing for the entity, and all the term debt was then rolled into DIP financing, so they became the priority lender in the situation. Funding was done to a 13-week cash flow with weekly reporting against the budget to the bank. We had to apply for the PPP forgiveness before we filed for the bankruptcy. The bank had to look at the stalking horse purchase agreement, as well as they were going to be taking over the building. And if you remember, MMTI, a related party, owned that building, and so they had to approve the lease. And then all the assets and customer product had to be paid for prior to leaving the facility. That's part of the accommodation agreement. It's part of the Chapter 5 plan that we put together, as well as ended up being a part of all the accommodation agreements that were signed. Outside of all this, as I mentioned, there was this third party unrelated debt structure that we had to unwind, and that had to be negotiated out, finalized, so that could free up the MMTI building and all of the assets it owned to be able to help with this total debt restructuring. So all of these different pieces were happening, and again, in a very short time frame. Then we did Miller Technical Services, and then Millstone Properties. They got their own line of credit, and then it was just a request to rebank within the next year. So again, it was a lot of moving pieces. You can see why so many people were happened. Lynn, I'm going to turn it over to you for the judicial process.
So, good afternoon. So, as a fundamental starting point, everyone should understand, as Heather pointed out earlier in her presentation, there is a union issue associated with Miller Tool and Die. Miller Tool and Die had unionized employees and participated in the union's multi-employer pension fund. With that being said, Miller Tool and Die also had assets with value that needed to be liquidated for the benefit of Comerica Bank. So we had identified a stalking horse bidder. However, given the potential for successor liability for a purchaser of assets when there is a withdrawal liability with the pension fund, the stalking horse bidder insisted that we go through a Chapter 11 and a 363 sale process. So we needed to file a bankruptcy, and this all came about very quickly. As Heather has indicated, we had spent some time trying to identify a purchaser for the assets, and no party was interested in purchasing the assets without a bankruptcy. And so we were quickly able to restructure the debt and then get ourselves into a bankruptcy in a very short period of time. So what I think it is worth addressing is we filed a subchapter 5. It was the first that we had done in our office, and we were able, given the COVID expansion of the subchapter 5 debt limits, to put this into the subchapter 5. So the filing for subchapter 5 is the same as with any other case. We put all the paperwork together, filed the subchapter 5, and we had a 90-day time frame to accomplish the noticing of the sale, sell the assets, complete all of the work in process, because we needed to complete the work in process in order to fully satisfy the bank's debt. As a auto supplier, part of our concerns were COVID. We were shipping product down to Mexico. We had a concern with respect to the implication of COVID, collecting on our debt, and then negotiating and getting through all of this with terminating our union contract, transitioning all of our assets to our purchaser, and meeting the subchapter 5 time constraints for putting together a liquidating plan. And so it's also worth noting that through this case, we were able to successfully put a liquidating plan together as an appropriate subchapter 5 process. We were not familiar with any other subchapter 5 cases that were liquidating plans. And the concern that had been raised by the US trustee was, given the fact that a subchapter 5 requires that the debtor provide that all of its disposable income for the 3 to 5 year period after confirmation is available for distribution to the unsecured creditors. Was that an appropriate subchapter 5 when it is a liquidation rather than a continued reorganization and operating capital coming into the case? So from a subchapter 5 standpoint, there are a few things that it's worth noting. Shortly after a subchapter 5 case is filed, you're required to have a status conference with the court that creditors can participate in and advise the court of what your plan is for the case. And so given our plan to liquidate, we had to move very quickly. We immediately identified the potential preference claimants and got demands out immediately. And for those of you who do debtor work, it's also worth noting that SABRA increased the duty on debtors to identify the defenses that are available to preference defendants. And so it requires that you move very quickly to get those out. We got those out very quickly. And we were successful in generating well in excess of $100,000 in preference recoveries in this very short time frame before we presented our plan to the court. In addition, it's also in the context of a subchapter 5 important to understand that you don't have a lot of time to get your voting taken care of, to address objections. And in this case, both the US trustee and the subchapter 5 trustee had objected to confirmation, concerned that we had, I guess, somewhat pushed this through so quickly. There had not been adequate review of the debtor's financials, given how quickly we had moved and liquidated the debtor's assets. We were very successful in getting this plan confirmed. We had well over 70% of the creditors had voted in favor of confirmation, as well as over 80% of the debt that had voted in favor of confirmation. So we were very successful in moving this forward, despite the fact that it was a liquidation and essentially the bulk of the recovery was going to Comerica. And the other point that's significant in this particular liquidation is that it did provide then, because we had a consensual plan under 1191, the debtor was successful in being discharged from all of the pre-petition debt. Post-confirmation, we are addressing and making a distribution to the priority creditors, who will all be paid in full. And that is in large part due to the cooperation that all of the parties, including the creditors and Comerica, in getting successful recovery on the work in process. Heather, go back to the prior slide. And I think it's important to note that we were able to recover $320,000 more on our work in process than originally projected because of the cooperation of all of the parties. The bank worked with us to ensure that we had adequate revenue to meet some customer demands. Some of the customers worked with us to accelerate our production and to take a recovery and equipment while it was in process and to pay for the work at that point. So that was a very successful portion of this bankruptcy, was our ability to generate revenue in excess of the initial projected revenue.
I want to make sure we leave time for Q&A as well.
Right.
Thank you.
So are we ready for some questions?
I don't know, Heather, do you want to finish up? Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Lynn. Go ahead and finish because we cut you off. And
Well, and I think the significance of this case is a number of things that we can take from this case. One, that you can put subchapter 5 liquidation together, but this was such a successful case because of the cooperation of everyone, the creditors, the secured lender, the debtor, and all of the professionals worked very well together to ensure that we were able to get through this very accelerated process. 90 days to get any Chapter 11 put together, let alone a liquidating Chapter 11 in which we accelerated the WIP, managed through COVID, shipping product down to Mexico to increase our recovery, collected on all of our preferences, and were successful in satisfying all of the secured debt. We'll have a recovery for the priority creditors, which are the, in this instance, we had priority claims for unpaid, earned yet unpaid vacation pay for the union. And we were successful in transitioning and selling assets free and clear of the pension fund's withdrawal liability. So it was a win-win for all of the stakeholders in the bankruptcy.
So Lynn, we have a question. How could we ensure the buyer would still be there after the bankruptcy?
The buyer is a completely separate and independent party. Other than the obligations to the related MMTI, it had no other obligations to the debtor's bankruptcy estate.
And the buyer was fully aware that this is the process that we were going to go through to be able to buy the assets. And he knew that there was a pension withdrawal liability concern and issue, and that this is what the process for the company had to go through to be able to have those assets free and clear for him to be able to purchase post-bankruptcy as well.
Well, and in fact, the buyer requested that we go through this process to ensure that we had resolved any potential successor liability claims that could have haunted him in the future.
Let me ask another question too. One of the questions is, was a liquidation appropriate for a subchapter 5 filing?
Well, certainly Judge Tucker confirmed our plan, and he certainly would not have confirmed the plan if he did not believe it was appropriate. And that is an issue because of the way subchapter 5, the code is written, and the essentially somewhat akin to a chapter 13 disposable income requirement. But in this case, there is no disposable income. There are no ongoing operations. And by virtue of the fact that all revenue was being distributed to creditors, I believe that we satisfied the requirements of subchapter 5.
So Heather and Lynn, what would you guys do differently if you went back in time? Where could things have changed for the better as you look back, and lessons learned as well?
We'd started earlier. All I can say is if we'd started earlier, we might not have even had to go through this process, or at least it wouldn't have been so, it was a very rushed process. It worked, but it was literally, it took a Herculean effort of all stakeholders involved in the process. So I don't know if we would have had to get to this point. We could have had a more thoughtful process if we'd started 6 to 9 months before what we actually did. Lynn, what do you think?
Well, so I have represented Miller Tool and Die for 15 years. And what would have made this process more effective or smoother is, in fact, as Heather suggested, had we started the process earlier. I'm sure all of us have dealt with clients who didn't believe they needed to ultimately end up in a bankruptcy, and that we would somehow manage to resolve, the cosmos would come together and they wouldn't need to file the bankruptcy. We were fully aware of the withdrawal liability. I just think there was no way we ever would have avoided the bankruptcy and satisfied the bank's obligations, transitioned those assets so that those assets didn't become obsolete assets sitting there with this withdrawal liability encumbering them. I'm not really sure, had we even started this much earlier, that it would have been much different, given the overlay of the withdrawal liability and the time constraints that a subchapter 5 puts on everyone. You've got 90 days to get through it.
We just asked a lot of all of the different stakeholders involved in the process. And everyone rose to the challenge and they did an excellent job of it, but it really did take a lot. It was a very, very accelerated process. We asked a lot of the bank in a very short period of time. They were able to support the plan that we put together, but it was a little helter-skelter there for a while, but it came together because everybody was professional, we were transparent, and we worked together for the betterment of all the stakeholders.
Heather and Lynn, that was fantastic. It was very refreshing, and you guys did a great job in going through that, especially given the fact that this subchapter 5 code is 18 months old. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective and to see the success that went on. So wonderful, and we thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Michael Yarmo. He'll take us through another turnaround situation, not a subchapter 5, but a more traditional turnaround, if you will, as a comparison to the case we just saw.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate
Michael?
it. And sorry, participants, if you hear a baby screaming downstairs, we've got a 3.5-week-old, and she just decided to find her lungs yesterday. She found her voice yesterday, so she couldn't have waited until after this, but hopefully she cooperates as well as we can hope. So I'm going to talk about a out-of-court workout with you guys for the next 20 minutes or so on a metal roof manufacturer. An interesting industry. I would say this is much of a income state turnaround as much a balance sheet turnaround. So I think you'll probably find a lot of focus on the income statement as much as the balance sheet on this in this part of the presentation. So let's jump into it. So first, I'm not going to drain the slide here. Lots of words here, but basically we've got a very simple corporate ownership. One owner established the business in 1996. A real kind of handyman type guy who built the business into a nice little profitable company. And if he had kind of stopped there and not try to corporatize it and expand it, we never would have heard from him. However, he got delusions of grandeur and said, my business that's spitting out $5 to $6 million a year in profit, I need more. And I want to take this business, which had primarily been operating in the Northwest, anywhere from Washington to Montana, and actually had a real nice lineup of clients. You know, they had done the metal roofing and siding on Tom Brady's house, and had a whole bunch of high profile customers, and was really well regarded in the industry. These guys again did metal roofing and metal siding, just a beautiful product, a proprietary product, proprietary colors and designs, and had allowed the contractors who were actually installing it on the roofs and the sides to actually earn higher profit margins on each job, because this was a very kind of premium product. So it was a case where contractors were happy, the company was happy, and the single entrepreneur had been making more money, well in advance of his initial investment many times over each year. But decided I want to expand. I want to take this company, try to take it national, and that's where the problem started. I would say they started around 2016, but really started culminating in 2018 when we arrived on the scene in late 2019, after revenues had dropped from 46 million to 36 million. And really what happened here was the delusions of grandeur were, every time I open up a new sales depot, I'm going to throw in a mill attached to the depot. So think if McDonald's opened up, every time they open up a location, they had a little slaughterhouse and a potato processing facility in the back every time that they open up a new location. That's essentially what these guys' growth strategy was, is I'm going to do a whole new additional mini mill every time I open up a new location. And that just threw on so much cost into the income statement. They couldn't grow their way out of a huge additional really fixed expense base, and revenues just weren't there. And what really got them in trouble was, as they started bleeding cash from this growth strategy, their cash started draining. They ran out of cash, couldn't pay the suppliers. And when you're in this industry, you really are only relying on about 4 or 5 raw steel mills to send you the product. So if you piss off a couple of them, then the word spreads that, hey, these guys aren't paying, and you quickly get shut off, and all of a sudden you're on a kind of a just-in-time situation, or you're trying to collect as much deposits up front from customers, many who are either not accustomed to paying up front or don't want to pay any more than 25% to a contractor, because frankly, anytime you want to do a renovation, you don't want to pay anything more than that to a contractor, because that guy might take off with your money. These guys were originally with Bank of America. They had hit a forbearance in mid July 2018. The note was sold off to a professional note buyer, which I will call PNB through the rest of this presentation, in June 2019, who then also put them on a forbearance agreement to try to, because everybody saw the positives out of this business. They knew this was a well-functioning company at one point in time, but just kept shooting themselves in the foot. And again, we jumped on the file here to try to figure out, how can we fix this company so that just don't keep running into this cycle? And this note was turning into a hot potato, where this professional note buyer either wanted to get rid of it or move it onto another bank, which would have caused this particular client even more headaches. Last but not least, I'll make the comment here that we quickly figured out the chief operating officer was pretty much a fraud. He was just completely not competent for the job. He was a sales guy by trade, and was acting as pretend chief operating officer for a multi-unit, multi-state, very heavy manufacturing company. So that was something we had to deal with. So on this slide here, I've affectionately called it the Newpoint process. And in red there in the bold, you'll see 20-day proactive assessment. So this is something we come into with every turnaround situation. And what we're really trying to do is we're trying to assess 4 different aspects, and we're trying to really get our arms wrapped around what's going on with this company. Number one is turnaround action matrix evaluation, or TAME. And this is our 120 question proprietary process where we're trying to discover, is this particular business based on qualitative, not quantitative measures. So I'm asking questions about their hiring process. How do they onboard, new employees? What's their market like? What are their ERP or accounting systems? Are they up to the job? How do they price their products? What are their competitors? And on and on and on. And I'm trying to get to 5 to 10 actual recommendations with financial statement impacts to say, okay, this is what's actually causing your business major headaches, and here's what we can do to fix it. So that's our turnaround action matrix evaluation algorithm that we run through on any of our 20-day proactive assessments. Table stakes number 2 is we have also got our 13-week cash flow model with easy to read charting and really a net liquidity projection. Again, we want to assess as to when are we going to run out of cash, how can we create cash, what our burn rate is, and really what our cash conversion cycle is in the business. Third is a break-even analysis, and fourth is a liquidation analysis. So again, we want to look at what kind of what our sensitivity to the business is in terms of what fixed and variable cost drivers can we play with, and how can we get this company at least back up to industry standards based on how the rest of the industry is performing. And last but not least is liquidation analysis. We're looking at each liability tranche, and we want to understand is if that's the lever that we have to pull, or if that's what we have to communicate to the bank, what can the bank expect if this company is a shutdown? And often what we find is there's not much there for the bank to take. So it's often in their best interest to work with us to try to do a turnaround, rather, especially an out-of-court turnaround, rather than just try to liquidate the company. So in terms of the debt structure, I've kept the names generalized here. But what was especially interesting with this company was they had taken their trade credit before that we had joined on. So they're number 1 and number 2 metal supplier. And it's trying to get these guys not to shut them off in terms of supplying them more steel, turn them into secured creditors. So they just took the regular old AP, threw them under some of the real estate, and said, "Okay, now you're a secured creditor. Please keep supplying us steel." And what they found was that okay, their cash burn rate was still just as bad before making them secured creditor as after making them secured creditor. And all of a sudden, now these guys have a power of shutting this company down and forcing them to sell off all this real estate that they had accumulated. So one thing we absolutely had to do was get a relationship down with these secured creditors, their metal suppliers, and figure out a payment plan that worked not only for the cash flow model, but for these metal suppliers in exchange for new inventory. As I mentioned in the previous slide, there's only so many of these raw metal coil suppliers out there. I can't go to too many places to find new supply. I had to work with the suppliers that were given to me. So we had to put a payment plan and basically show them the cash flow model, show them the TAME model, and tell them what are we actually going to do to fix this company. Please don't shut them down. Last but not least is we had leases payable both to Daimler and to Toyota, and I put these on specifically because when we did the TAME analysis and we figured out these guys had 25 different trucks for 6 to 7 locations, which is way more than what the industry requires. They had trucks just sitting there collecting dust. I don't know if the owner did like drag races in the back with 25 trucks at the end of the night, but they certainly weren't being used for business reasons. They again just poor planning and decided to way over expense their business in exchange for not a lot of extra additional revenue growth. So what was the out-of-court outcome? We were able to show significant operation and cash position improvements, earning an extension of the forbearance agreement well past the 2020 slow winter period. So when you're dealing with a construction business, which is essentially these guys are, you really have between April and October to work with, and you have to go into your slow periods, either being friendly with your banks or in a good cash position to be able to weather that storm. Sorry, that part of the bad winter pun there. Where we really wanted to focus on is we've discovered that these guys had tremendously low profit margins given where we thought their premium product was. And that was really a result of this kind of mini mill, McDonald's throwing a potato production facility at every location. So we basically kind of shut that down and converted them into a super center model. And what me and my colleague Chad had done is we'd actually took the existing locations that we wanted to keep as super center model and actually walked the locations. We actually did step by step. We had a step counter, and we needed to determine what was the most efficient way of walking through these production facilities. Where were we going to place all this additional equipment that we had from all these mini mills into additional super centers, and how are we actually going to do kind of a Lego Jenga type model and squeeze all this equipment in so that it flowed correctly, it was efficient, and we were creating more of a hub and a spoke system rather than every single location had way too much equipment. That actually allowed them to increase their margins by about 10 basis points. So, if you look at 36 million in revenue, 10 basis points, 3.6 million is nothing to sneeze at. That's actually quite a lot of additional cash that would flow through in a busy season. That would help a lot with what they had on their balance sheet and try to just create cash so that they didn't have to go to a customer and say, I need you to put 50 to 75% down just so I can at least start your job. We also did a geographic expansion into southern states. What we found was one of their, for as bad as their COO was, their CMO, their chief marketing officer, was a superstar and was extremely good at acquiring customers through social media. And we were able to do more national sales. So we basically produce them in the Pacific Northwest, ship them down to southern states, and have somebody else install them down there, and use the power of their ability to create customers through social media engagements. We also, we replaced the COO. That was, if you were to ask me what would I do differently, I think we left the current COO on the vine a little bit too long. We try to work with him rather than quickly replace him, and we found that was a bad strategy. So we ended up replacing him, much to the demise of the owner, who actually was quite fond of him, and replaced him with a very experienced automotive OEM executive, just a much stronger KPI metrics focused executive to run these plants and make sure that the existing super centers were operating at full utilization. And we really had to work on repairing the reputation with a lot of Pacific Northwest contractors. And that's something I can't stress enough, is when you have contractors who have to fork over money to have their trades on site, and you can't deliver them product, you're once bitten, twice shy. So once you're the third and fourth and fifth late delivery, these major contractors who are actually putting them on the roofs and on the siding of Tom Brady's house, all of a sudden says, hey, I can't trust you guys that the next time you're actually going to deliver. We had to be very, very proactive and bring these contractors every step of the way through the TAME process, as we went through these 5 to 10 initiatives to repair the business. So post workout is the turnover actually of most senior leadership with more capable talent. I've really touched on the COO, but the CFO and the HR head we found were lacking, so we actually had them replaced. Ownership was able to retain 100% of equity stake. Again, we increased the margins by 10 basis points. We were able to chop $2 million of expense reduction on top of increasing margins by 10%. So there's a real swing in their P&L from one year to the next. The professional note buyer liked what we were doing and extended the forbearance through the 2020 winter season. And we, here's a note from my my attorney friends, is that we are always looking to engage attorneys even through out of court workouts. And when we were able to do that was future growth was going to come from a dealership model rather than a corporate owned model. So I spent a lot of time with our attorney friends and with ownership on developing that dealership package, so that when we were ready to start expanding again, it was through a dealership model, and which would help reduce the amount of cash required to expand, and really would increase margins and allow this company to grow properly rather than grow poorly, which they had been doing. And there was a $1 million cash increase going into the 2020 season versus the 2019 winter season, which allowed them to properly maintain those slow winter months. Lessons learned, and this is my last slide here before I pass on to Q&A, is different parts of the growth curve require a different CEO and management skill set. So make sure you have the proper people in place when you're at different parts of your growth curve. Be aware of a COO who doesn't use any KPIs and kind of feels his way through operations. That's not how you run a professional organization. You have to carefully plan out your corporate growth. I think that goes without saying. Don't promote managers into senior executive positions if they're nice to you. What we found with the owner was he was a very trusting guy and would do a lot for you if you were kind of buddy with him. If you were kind of that yes man to him, he would move you up to the top of the food chain. And that's, again, not really a way to run a professional organization, especially the size of these guys. And over communicate with your senior lenders. So we let go of the CFO as well for the sole reason that every time that the tough got going, he would bury his head in the sand and not tell the senior lenders anything, which is, again, why this file became a bit of a hot potato. So hopefully that kind of gives you a sense of what an out of court turnaround looks like, what the expectations were, what our process is, and kind of the heavy lifting that is required sometimes of these out of court workouts. There was a lot of tactful things, anywhere from us, rebuilding the senior leadership team, to us walking around the floor, making sure that we've got a proper execution of super centers. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a better idea as to what an out of court workout looks like.
Thank you, Michael. That's great. So you mentioned that one of the things that you would definitely would have been to move the COO out earlier. But if we also go back in time, what are things that you would have done differently other than that?
I probably would have been even more proactive with the contractors as well. We were under the assumption, based on the ownership's word, who had many years of experience in the industry, that don't worry, we'll get these major contractors back. And what we found was they weren't coming back in as quickly as they were. And we were relying a lot more on the DIY guy who wanted to put up his roof up on his own house, rather than these more larger corporate contractors who were doing massive amounts of volume. So it took. I could have sped up this turnaround quicker if I had engaged them faster and let them know this is actually what we're doing, and this is not just lip service. We're actually fixing this company from the ground up, and here's what went wrong. So it's just over communicating with your senior lender, but also if you've got a customer concentration, which these guys had, just be a little more proactive with them, and that's probably what I would have done quite differently with this one.
So in real estate, they always say location. In this business, I think we'd all agree it's communication. When you say over communicate to your senior lender when times get tough, what kind of cadence is that? Is there a way to define that somehow so you're not being too lax in reaching your lender, but you're also not bothering your lender?
You've got to kind of work to where the what your SAG officer, your SAG contact is looking for. This professional note buyer was, I would say, on the smaller end. Bank of America, this might have been a rounding error for them, but the professional note buyer, this is quite a significant file for them. The weekly touch points with them, letting them know where the cash flow model was. And this goes for the metal manufacturers who became senior creditors as well. These were quite large APs that were sitting on their books. So it was weekly communications with a cash flow model and how we're tracking versus our 5 to 10 recommendations that we were doing to actually fix the business. So again, you kind of have to read your audience a bit, but we had to constantly hold these guys' hands to make sure that they were up to date as to what our progress was. And I would let them know what was working and what was not working, just to show that I'm trying to be open and honest here as much as possible.
Fantastic. So we have a few minutes left. I'd like to open it up to Q&A to all the panelists on either case study, the subchapter 5 or the out-of-court restructuring. So if anyone has questions they want to ask on those, any of the case studies, this would be the time to do it. So who's got any questions for us? It's a very quiet crowd. Do any of the panelists want to accentuate any of the things that they've said or bring to forefront any of their findings again? Still a quiet crowd. So with that, we're really proud and happy you came here today. I want to thank the panelists. Lynn and Heather and Michael did a fantastic job. I think it was very interesting. I hope that you guys took away from it some of the knowledge and some of the experiences and things that they did well and they could do better. But obviously they're tremendous professionals in our community. So we appreciate that. We appreciate all the participants for taking the time in their day to listen in and hopefully learn as well. I know this is being recorded for those who can't make it, so we appreciate that. And we're going to have some networking coming up. I am going to, again, thank everybody for their participation and also thank Amanda for her involvement in setting this up. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Michael Boudreau. Thank you very much, everyone.